Say the name of an animal out loud. Now keep going for 20 seconds and count every name you get. That count is the test a neurologist runs in a 9-minute appointment. Your score doesn't measure what you know. It measures how fast you can find it. Two people can score the same 8 and be in entirely different situations, because the total is the least useful part of the test. The shape of those 20 seconds is what I'll teach you to read. So let's do the real version properly, because reading about a test is nothing like being inside one. Sit still. Put down whatever is in your hand. You're going to name animals, out loud if you're alone, under your breath if someone's in the room. And you're going to count them on your fingers. Repeats don't count. Dog and puppy is one animal, not two. Ready, go. Keep going. Don't judge them, just say them. 5 seconds, 2. Stop. Stop. Hold your number. Don't round it up. Here's where that number sits. I'll give you the 20-second bands first, then the full minute bands a clinic uses, because you should have both. 20 seconds. In your 60s, 8 to 10. In your 70s, 7 to 9. 80 and over, 6 to 8. Now the full minute. 60s, 16 to 20. 70s, 14 to 18. 80 and over, 12 to 16. You may have noticed the short bands are simply the long bands cut in half. That halving is mine, and it's roughly fair because most people produce close to half their animals in the first 20 seconds. The easy ones arrive in a rush and the flow thins after. Roughly fair is not the same as validated. The published figures come from normative work like Tombaugh's 1999 study of around 1,300 adults aged 16 to 95, and those were 60-second tests. So treat the short version as a window, not a measurement. The band that surprised me was the last one. I expected the fall from the 60s to the 80s to be a cliff, and it isn't. It's about 4 words. 4 words across 20 years of a life. And one score on one Tuesday morning is a data point, not a verdict. Near the end, I'll tell you exactly what to do in the moment a name refuses to come, because what almost everyone does in that moment makes the same name harder the next time. Here's the distinction the whole test turns on. There are 2 completely separate jobs your brain performs with any word: holding it and finding it. Holding is storage. Finding is retrieval. Different tissue, different systems, and they break in different ways. Order picking is a logistics term. In a warehouse, inventory and picking are 2 unrelated problems, and a warehouse can hold every single item on its shelves and still fail to ship an order by 5 o'clock, because the route is long, the aisles are dim, and the thing is shelved next to nothing related to it. Nothing is missing from that building. The finding is slow. Your semantic memory, the store of everything you know that isn't a personal event, held largely in the anterior temporal lobes, the tissue behind and slightly forward of your ears, is the inventory. Your prefrontal cortex, behind your forehead, is the picker. The prefrontal cortex chooses where to look, notices when a shelf has run dry, and decides to move somewhere else. A 20-second animal test puts a stopwatch on the picker, not on the warehouse. Now use that model to predict something I haven't told you. If the inventory is full and only the picking is slow, then handing someone the aisle number should transform the result. The same person, the same brain, the same minute suddenly producing far more. Tulving and Pearlstone tested exactly that in 1966. They gave people lists of words organized into categories, then asked them to recall as many as possible. People recalled a fraction. Then, the researchers simply spoke the category names aloud, not the words, just the headings, and asked again. Recall jumped enormously, roughly half again as many words in the harder conditions, with nothing new learned in between. The words had been sitting there the entire time, unreachable and undamaged. That study is 60 years old and it still hasn't reached the general public, which I find genuinely strange. Because it means the sentence "I've forgotten his name" is, most of the time, factually wrong. The name is present, the route to it is quiet. You already have proof of this in your own life. It's 11 at night, you're rinsing a cup, thinking about nothing, and the name arrives, the one you chased for 20 minutes that afternoon and gave up on. Nobody put it back. It never left. It surfaced the moment you stopped searching, and later I'll explain why stopping is precisely what led it through. Which raises a harder question. If the words are intact, why does the picker get slower? And how far back does the slowing go? In 1986, David Snowdon walked into a convent in Mankato, Minnesota, to meet the school sisters of Notre Dame. He wanted a study population with almost no confounding variables. Same diet, same routine, same medical care, no smoking, no drinking. Same living conditions for decades. In the archives, he found something he wasn't looking for. Handwritten autobiographies, 1 page or two, written by each young woman around the age of 22, most of them in the 1930s, on the day she took her vows. Snowdon's team scored those pages for idea density. How many distinct ideas each sister packed into every 10 words. Then they compared those scores to who developed Alzheimer's disease 60 years later. The result, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1996, was that the essays written at 22 predicted, at a group level, cognitive outcomes 6 decades on. Now let me correct something before it runs away from you. Including from my own argument, you may have heard that verbal tests can spot dementia 12 years ahead. That figure gets repeated constantly, and I'd rather be straight. It comes from group averages across large cohorts, where a slight downward drift becomes visible only when you average hundreds of people. It cannot tell one person on one morning anything about their own future. The mechanism is real. The prediction, for an individual, is far weaker than the headline suggests. And the Nun Study's more important finding is the one nobody quotes. Sister Mary died at 101 with high cognitive scores near the end of her life. When her brain was examined, it was full of the plaques and tangles of advanced Alzheimer's disease. The pathology was there, the symptoms were not. Several sisters showed the same split. Researchers call it cognitive reserve, and I'll be honest that cognitive reserve is more a description of the gap than an explanation of it. Nobody can yet tell you precisely what tissue does the compensating. What we can see is the everyday version of the slowdown, and it isn't dramatic. It's a man at a dinner table in his 70s who pauses 2 seconds too long on the name of a town, feels the pause, and decides not to tell that story again. Then another story goes. Then he becomes the quiet one at the end of the table who agrees with everybody. 10 years of that, and the picker has walked almost no routes at all, and the routes you don't walk are the ones that get dark. But total score can't distinguish that man from someone whose warehouse is genuinely thinning. The total is blind to it. What separates them is something inside your 20 seconds, and it has been sitting in the research since 1997. Your 20 seconds was not a list. It was a series of bursts. Almost everyone says something like dog, cat, horse, cow, sheep, pause, lion, tiger, elephant, pause, shark, whale. Angela Troyer and her colleagues at Toronto named those 2 components in 1997. The runs are clusters, animals from one small neighborhood, farm or jungle, or ocean, which come out almost free of effort. The pauses are switches, the moment the neighborhood empties and your prefrontal cortex has to abandon it and choose another. Clustering is the warehouse, switching is the picker. And here's what makes this the whole product of the test. In ordinary aging, cluster size stays roughly intact, and switching gets slower. The neighborhoods are full, the walking between them takes longer. In Alzheimer's disease, the pattern is the opposite shape. The clusters themselves shrink because the neighborhoods are genuinely emptying. Same score, different machine failing. If that just rearranged something for you, and there's a layer coming that's stranger than this one about what happens in your head in the seconds when a word won't arrive. Subscribe now, because that section is a few minutes away, and it's the reason I made this. So, in order, your score is a search speed, not an inventory count. The store sits in the anterior temporal lobes, and the searcher sits behind your forehead. Queuing a category in 1966 raised recall by roughly half again, with nothing relearned. 20-second bands run 8 to 10, 7 to 9, 6 to 8 by decade. And the diagnostic information isn't in your total at all. It's in whether your runs were long and your pauses long, or your runs were short, which leaves a question I haven't touched. When a word won't come, you can usually feel that you know it. Where does that feeling come from if the word itself isn't available? Let's test that directly. On you, right now. I'm going to describe something. The instrument a sailor holds up to measure the angle between a star and the horizon, to work out where the ship is. Brass, hinged, with a small telescope and a mirror. One of 3 things just happened. The word arrived whole, or nothing came at all. Or, and this is the interesting one, the word did not arrive but you knew you had it, and you might even have known it starts with an S. and has two syllables. It's a sextant. That third state is the one that matters. Deborah Burke and Donald MacKay published work in 1991 showing that older adults have more of those moments than younger adults do, but that the partial information inside them stays accurate. First letter, syllable count, sometimes the shape of the ending. Their explanation, the transmission deficit hypothesis, is that a word is stored as two connected things, its meaning and its sound. The meaning fires, the connection to the sound is thin, and thin connections carry weaker signals. So everything I've said so far assumed the problem is a slow search. That isn't quite right. And here's the harder version. The search isn't failing. The search is succeeding, arriving at the correct address and finding the last wire between meaning and sound too thin to carry the current. You reached the right door, the bell didn't ring, and connections thin from disuse far more than from age. Which is where the real cost lives, and it is not the missing word. It's the sentence you abandon. It's choosing the word you can reach instead of the word you meant. 100 times a week, until the reachable vocabulary shrinks around you like a house where you've stopped opening certain rooms. Nobody measures that. There's no test for the things you didn't say. Now, some of you scored under your band and you're already dismissing all of this. And your reasons are good ones. You were nervous. Someone was watching. You'd just woken up. Or, and this is the big one, English isn't your first language, or it's your second of three. Take that last one seriously, because the research does. Bilingual adults reliably score lower on category fluency in each language tested separately than monolinguals do in their one language. And it isn't a deficit, it's arithmetic. You maintain two full sets of names for the same animals, and the 20 seconds only counts one set. Count both languages together, and the picture usually looks entirely different. I'll add my honest caveat. Normative tables for multilingual older adults are thin, and applying an American or Canadian table to a life lived in 3 languages is a rough instrument at best. Nerves are real too. Being timed measurably lowers fluency output, and so does the first hour after waking. If your number felt wrong, retest tomorrow, mid-morning when nobody's watching, and use that one. Now to the part I promised, which is what to do in the actual moment. The shop, the doorway, the name that won't come. First, when the flow stops, do not dig in the same place. That's the switching cost, and digging is the single most expensive thing you can do. Change the location instead of straining for the word. Say the place out loud in your head. The farm, the ocean, the jungle, the house, the cold. If you'd added that one habit to your 20 seconds, you would very likely have scored 2 or 3 higher, and it wouldn't be cheating. It's the exact strategy your prefrontal cortex is meant to run, and has stopped running automatically. Second, and this is the one almost nobody has heard, when a person's name won't come, stop chasing it at 10 seconds. Count to 10, then deliberately let go. Not because chasing is unpleasant, because there is evidence that prolonged unsuccessful searching strengthens the wrong path. Warriner and Humphreys reported in 2008 that the longer people struggled on a word they couldn't retrieve, the more likely that same word was to be blocked again later. The struggle itself gets learned. Here's the honest limit of that, and I want it sitting right next to the advice. That work used word pairs in a laboratory, not the name of your neighbor's husband at a wedding. It's a small literature, and psychologists still argue about how far it carries into real life. What I can say is that the alternative costs you nothing. Let go. Say the parts you do have out loud. Where you met, the first letter, what they drive, and the name lands within a minute or two remarkably often. That's queuing. That's Tulving in a supermarket aisle. Third, pay attention to what you say about yourself in that moment. Becca Levy's work at Yale in 1996 found that briefly exposing older adults to negative aging stereotypes lowered their memory performance in the same session. Saying "I'm losing it" out loud is not a neutral report on your own state. It's an instruction. So here's what to watch for over the next 7 days. Not exercises. Just noticing, because you cannot change a system you've never observed. 1. When a word sticks, notice whether you have pieces of it. The first letter, the number of syllables. Count how many times in the week the pieces turn out to be correct. That accuracy rate is the clearest signal that your warehouse is intact. 2. Notice which category is slow. Names of people, names of objects, or names of places. They fail at different rates, and the difference is informative. 3. Time 1 recovery. When you let a name go, Note the clock and note it again when the name arrives. Under 2 minutes tells you a great deal. 4. Notice one sentence you started and abandoned and finish it out loud anyway, badly, with the wrong word in it. That's the whole point. If just the second and third of those were new to you, hit like. It's the only signal that puts this in front of someone who's been quietly frightened by a pause at a dinner table. And send this to the one person you know who has started apologizing for their own memory. They're the one who needs the storage and retrieval distinction, not the reassurance. Then tell me 3 things below: your age, where you're watching from, and your number from the 20 seconds. I read them and I want to see where the line actually falls, because I don't fully trust the published tables and you're a bigger sample than they had. Nothing was missing tonight. Something was slow. And you were there, watching yourself look.